March 17, 2024. Construction workers renovating the basement of a colonial-style villa overlooking Nahuel Lake struck something that shouldn't exist. The sledgehammer of foreman Miguel Ortega punched through what appeared to be a standard concrete wall, revealing not insulation or plumbing but darkness, a hollow space. Behind the wall, hidden for nearly 8 decades, lay a reinforced chamber measuring approximately 4.3 meters by 3.8 meters, sealed with German engineering precision. Inside, preservation was nearly perfect. The mountain air, cool and dry at 820 meters elevation, had mummified rather than rotted. On a wooden desk sat a leather-bound journal, its pages brittle but legible. Beside it, a Walther P38 pistol, serial number 3847K, manufactured in 1943 at the Mauser factory in Oberndorf. 3 passports under different names: Ricardo Clement, Otto Pape, and Friedrich Wenner. Photographs of the same man at different ages. Bank documents from Banco de la Nación Argentina dating from 1951 to 1977. Property deeds. Letters written in German, addressed to Main Liebst Marguerite, but never sent. And then the definitive piece, a Wehrmacht officer's uniform, perfectly folded, bearing the insignia of a Generalleutnant, a lieutenant general, with the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross still pinned to the collar. Inside the jacket pocket, an identification card issued by the German High Command in 1944. The photograph matched the face in the passports. The name was unmistakable: Generalleutnant Wilhelm Eduard von Richter. According to every official record maintained by the Allied forces, the Soviet Red Army, and post-war German archives, Wilhelm von Richter died on April 28, 1945, in the Battle of Berlin. His body was reportedly identified among the ruins of the Reich Chancellery bunker complex by Soviet forces who catalogued thousands of corpses in the final days of the Third Reich. The International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg listed him as deceased. His wife, Marguerite, received official notification of his death from the Provisional German government in 1946. His military service record, now stored in the Bundesarchiv Militärarchiv in Freiburg, contains a death certificate signed by a Soviet medical officer, dated May 3, 1945. But the man whose uniform hung in that hidden chamber, 11,000 kilometers from Berlin, didn't die in 1945. The forensic team from the Argentine Federal Police arrived at 13:20 hours. Dr. Elena Vasquez, chief forensic anthropologist from the University of Buenos Aires, was called in at 14:55 hours. By 1800 hours, the chamber had been photographed, catalogued, and sealed as a historical crime scene. The journal, written in meticulous German script, detailed not a death in Berlin, but an escape route spanning 3 continents, 6 false identities, and the complicity of at least 47 individuals across 12 countries. The dental records obtained from surviving Wehrmacht documentation matched perfectly with a set of dentures found in a ceramic cup on the desk. Handwriting analysis comparing the journal entries to von Richter's military communications, requisition forms, battle orders, personal letters seized by Allied forces, returned a 97.3% probability match. Carbon dating of the journal paper indicated manufacture between 1945 and 1948, consistent with post-war South American production. The most damning evidence came from 3 letters buried in a metal box beneath the floorboards. Written between 1953 and 1959, they were addressed to Marguerite von Richter at an address in Dusseldorf that property records confirmed she occupied until her death in 1962. The letters were never sent, likely judged too dangerous. But they contained information only Wilhelm von Richter could have known: the name of their daughter's childhood dog, Brunhilde, the exact date they first met at a military ball in Munich, November 11, 1932, details of a miscarriage Marguerite suffered in 1940 that appeared in no official records but was mentioned in her private diary, later donated to a Berlin archive by her grandson in 2003. The man whose remains were supposedly interred in a mass grave outside Berlin had lived in comfortable exile until at least 1979. The evidence suggested he died not as a war criminal hunted by justice, but as an old man in peace, under an assumed name, surrounded by the wealth he had smuggled from a dying Reich. The official story was a lie. The convenient death in Berlin was a fabrication, and the truth, preserved in that mountain chamber, raised an impossible question. If one of the Third Reich's senior military commanders could vanish completely, living 3 decades in plain sight while the world believed him dead, how many others did the same? If you want to see what investigators found in those letters, what von Richter's journal revealed about the escape network that spirited hundreds of Nazi officials to freedom, and how he orchestrated one of history's most audacious disappearances, hit the like button and subscribe, because this story goes deeper than anyone imagined. Wilhelm Eduard von Richter was born on July 23, 1897, in Potsdam, Prussia, into a family with 3 centuries of military tradition. His great-grandfather served under Frederick the Great. His grandfather commanded a cavalry regiment in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. His father, Oberst Maximilian von Richter, died leading a charge at the Battle of Tannenberg in August 1914, when Wilhelm was just 17 years old. This death shaped everything that followed. Wilhelm abandoned his university studies in engineering at the Technical University of Berlin and enlisted in the Imperial German Army on September 3, 1914. At 17, he was assigned to the 5th Prussian Infantry Regiment as a second lieutenant, one of the youngest officers in his battalion. Over the next 4 years, he would experience the industrialized slaughter of the Western Front firsthand. The trenches of Verdun, the Somme offensive, the spring offensive of 1918 that nearly broke the Allied lines. Unlike many aristocratic officers who commanded from the rear, von Richter built his reputation on tactical brilliance and personal courage. In March 1916, at the age of 18, he led a night raid that captured a French machine gun position near Douaumont, personally killing 3 enemy soldiers with his sidearm when the assault faltered. The action earned him the Iron Cross Second Class. By 1917, he had been promoted to Hauptmann, captain, and commanded a company in the 5th Regiment. His men called him Der Fuchs, the Fox, for his ability to anticipate enemy movements and extract his units from impossible situations with minimal casualties. When Germany collapsed in November 1918, von Richter was 21 years old, a decorated veteran with no marketable skills beyond warfare. The Versailles Treaty reduced the German military to 100,000 men, but von Richter's record secured him a position in the Reichswehr, the small professional army permitted under the treaty. Through the chaotic 1920s, as Germany lurched between hyperinflation and political violence, he studied military theory, mastered logistics, and cultivated connections with the officer corps that would later form the Wehrmacht. He met Marguerite Hoffmann at a regimental ball in Munich on November 11, 1932, 14 years to the day after the armistice that ended the war that had defined his youth. She was the daughter of a textile manufacturer, educated in Switzerland, fluent in French and English. They married on June 3, 1933, 3 months after Adolf Hitler became chancellor. Their first child, a daughter named Helene, was born on March 19, 1934. A son, Maximilian, named for Wilhelm's father, followed on December 8, 1936. Von Richter's career accelerated with the expansion of the Wehrmacht after 1935. Hitler repudiated the Versailles Treaty and Germany began rebuilding its military. Von Richter, now an Oberstleutnant, lieutenant colonel, was assigned to the General Staff, where he worked on operational planning for Case White, the invasion of Poland. His specialty was logistics, the unglamorous but essential work of ensuring armies had fuel, ammunition, food, and medical supplies where they needed them, when they needed them. This expertise made him invaluable. In September 1939, as the Wehrmacht rolled across Poland in 27 days, von Richter coordinated supply lines for the 4th Panzer Division. In May 1940, during the invasion of France, he served as Chief Logistics Officer for Army Group B, ensuring that the armored spearheads driving toward the Channel coast didn't outrun their fuel supplies. Promoted to Oberst, Colonel, in June 1940, he received the German Cross in Gold in December 1941 for his work organizing supply convoys during the first winter of Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. But logistics also gave him perspective that most frontline officers lacked. Von Richter saw the raw numbers, the tonnage of ammunition expended, the casualty reports, the fuel consumption rates that Germany's synthetic oil production couldn't sustain. By 1942, he understood what many Nazi leaders refused to accept. Germany was losing the war of attrition. The United States had entered the conflict. The Soviet Union refused to collapse, and Britain fought on. The mathematics of industrial production, troop replacement rates, and strategic resources all pointed toward eventual defeat. In November 1942, von Richter was promoted to Generalmajor, Major General, and given command of the 267th Infantry Division, stationed in occupied France. This was his first field command of a division-sized unit, approximately 12,000 men responsible for coastal defense and anti-partisan operations in Normandy. He commanded competently but without enthusiasm, earning neither significant praise nor condemnation from his superiors. When the Allies invaded Normandy on June 6, 1944, the 267th Division was overrun within 48 hours. Von Richter, evacuated to Germany to avoid capture, was reassigned to staff duties. August 1, 1944, marked the day that changed everything. Wilhelm von Richter returned to his home in Berlin-Dahlem on a brief leave to discover that it no longer existed. An RAF bombing raid the previous night, targeting the industrial districts to the east, had scattered high-explosive bombs across residential neighborhoods. The villa where he had lived with Marguerite and their children since 1938 was a crater filled with smoking rubble. His wife and both children, Helene, age 10, and Maximilian, age 7, had been in the basement shelter when a 500-kilogram bomb struck directly overhead. Their bodies were recovered 3 days later, identifiable only by fragments of clothing and Marguerite's wedding ring. The Wehrmacht granted him 2 weeks bereavement leave. When he returned to duty on August 18th, colleagues reported he was a different man. The careful, methodical logistics officer had been replaced by someone hollow, going through motions without conviction. He requested transfer to the Eastern Front, perhaps seeking death in combat, but was denied. His expertise was too valuable as Germany's position deteriorated. On December 20, 1944, von Richter was promoted to Generalleutnant, Lieutenant General, and appointed Deputy Chief of Logistics for the Defense of Berlin Command. The promotion came with the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, presented by Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel on January 8, 1945. Von Richter accepted it without comment. By then, the Soviet Red Army had liberated Poland and stood on the Oder River, less than 70 kilometers from Berlin. American and British forces approached from the west. The Third Reich had perhaps 4 months to live. In his new position, von Richter had access to everything: detailed maps of Berlin's defenses, rosters of available units, locations of supply depots and fuel reserves, evacuation plans for government officials, and, most importantly, the communications network connecting Berlin to what remained of the German military structure across Europe and beyond. He also had the trust of his superiors, earned through 26 years of competent service. No one suspected that the widowed general, working 18-hour days coordinating the hopeless defense of Berlin, was simultaneously planning something else entirely. What von Richter understood, with the clarity that comes from having nothing left to lose, was that the war was over. The question wasn't whether Germany would lose, but what would happen to senior officers when it did. The Allies were already planning war crimes tribunals. The Soviet Union was executing captured officers in the field. Surrender meant imprisonment at best, execution at worst. But von Richter had advantages that most officers lacked. His logistics expertise gave him knowledge of supply routes, hidden depots, and transportation networks. His staff position gave him access to typewriters, official stamps, and blank identity documents. His family was dead, which meant no hostages or emotional ties to bind him to Germany's fate. And his decades of service had built relationships with hundreds of officers, officials, and civilians across Europe. Relationships that could be exploited, called in as favors, or purchased with the right currency. The gold reserves of the Reichsbank looted art, seized assets from Jewish families, and confiscated valuables from across occupied Europe provided that currency. As deputy chief of logistics, von Richter knew where portions of this wealth were stored, who guarded it, and how it could be moved. By February 1945, as Soviet artillery began ranging Berlin's outer districts, Wilhelm von Richter had made his decision. He would not die in the ruins of the Third Reich. He would not face justice in a tribunal. He would disappear. And for 79 years, his plan worked perfectly. April 16, 1945, 500 hours. The Battle of Berlin begins. 2.5 million Soviet soldiers, supported by 6,250 tanks and 41,600 artillery pieces, launched the final assault on the German capital. From his office in the Reich Chancellery bunker complex, Generalleutnant Wilhelm von Richter heard the barrage commence. A rolling thunder from the Seelow Heights, 70 kilometers to the east, that shook dust from the concrete ceiling. The Red Army had begun its push toward Berlin with an artillery bombardment unprecedented in human history. More shells expended in the first half hour than the entire Western Front in 1918. Von Richter had 12 days. The timeline was already set. Soviet forces would breach Berlin's outer defenses by April 21st. They would reach the city center by April 25th. Hitler would commit suicide by April 30th, give or take 2 days depending on how long his delusions persisted. By May 2nd, whoever remained in command would surrender, and Berlin would become a Soviet occupation zone. Von Richter's escape plan, refined over 3 months of careful preparation, depended on executing each step with precision timing. Too early, and his absence would be noticed, triggering searches that could intercept him. Too late, and the window for movement would close as Soviet forces encircled the city completely. April 18, 1945, 1400 hours, 2 days into the battle. Von Richter submitted a report to General Helmuth Weidling, commandant of the Berlin defense area, documenting ammunition and food reserves in the city's western districts. The report was accurate, thorough, and pessimistic. Current consumption rates meant supplies would last perhaps 8 to 10 days. The report also recommended establishing emergency supply depots in specific locations that von Richter had personally selected because they sat on his planned escape route. Weidling approved the recommendations without question. Why would he doubt the deputy chief of logistics? Over the next 48 hours, under von Richter's orders, Wehrmacht trucks transported crates labeled emergency rations and medical supplies to 3 locations: a warehouse in Spandau, a shuttered factory in Potsdam, and a farm complex 15 kilometers southwest of Berlin near the village of Teltow. The crates contained food and medicine, yes, but also civilian clothing, forged identity documents, 47 kilograms of gold bars removed from a Reichsbank storage facility in Potsdam, US dollars and Swiss francs totaling approximately $180,000 at 1945 exchange rates, 3 handguns with ammunition, and detailed maps marking safe houses and contact points stretching from Berlin to the Austrian border. The trucks were driven by men von Richter had personally selected, veterans from his old division, men who had served under him in Normandy and owed him their loyalty. Each was told only his specific role. None knew the full plan. April 20th, 1945, 1900 hours, Hitler's 56th birthday. The Führer emerged from his bunker for the last time, shuffling through the Reich Chancellery garden to inspect a Hitler Youth delegation receiving medals. Soviet artillery was now close enough that explosions could be heard clearly between speeches. Von Richter attended, standing at attention in his uniform, while Hitler's trembling hands pinned iron crosses to the chests of boys as young as 12 who would be dead within a week. That evening, the inner circle fractured. Hermann Göring fled Berlin by car, heading south. Heinrich Himmler opened secret negotiations with the Western Allies through Count Bernadotte. Senior officers began positioning themselves for survival rather than victory. In the chaos, one more general preparing contingencies attracted no attention. April 22, 1945, 15:30 hours, the first critical move. Von Richter left the Reich Chancellery bunker, ostensibly to inspect defensive positions in Spandau. He traveled in a Kübelwagen, a German military jeep, with his adjutant, Hauptmann Ernst Kohler, and 2 soldiers as drivers. The route took them west through districts already under sporadic Soviet artillery fire. Buildings burned on both sides of the street. Refugees clogged the roads, fleeing deeper into the city even as the trap closed around them. At 16:20 hours, they reached the warehouse in Spandau. Von Richter ordered the soldiers to remain with the vehicle while he and Kohler went inside to verify supply inventory. Once inside, they moved quickly. Von Richter stripped off his uniform and donned the civilian clothing stored in one of the crates, a worn brown suit, a worker's cap, a leather coat. He transferred the contents of 2 crates into a canvas rucksack, gold bars, currency, documents, a handgun. The uniform went into an empty crate, carefully folded. He might need it later, or it might serve as a decoy. He kept only the Knight's Cross, slipping it into his coat pocket, a dangerous souvenir, but one he couldn't abandon. Hauptmann Kohler watched this transformation without comment. Von Richter had recruited him carefully. Kohler was 28, a former engineering student who had been drafted in 1943. He had no Nazi Party membership, no war crimes in his record, and a pragmatic understanding that the war was lost. Von Richter had offered him a choice: remain in Berlin and face Soviet capture, or assist in the escape and share in the resources that would ensure survival. Kohler chose survival. At 16:55 hours, von Richter handed Kohler a sealed envelope. Inside were orders, typed on official Wehrmacht stationery and signed with von Richter's forged signature, instructing the 2 soldiers waiting outside to drive Kohler back to the Reich Chancellery and then report to defensive positions in the Tiergarten. The orders also contained a false report. Generalleutnant von Richter had proceeded to forward defensive positions in Spandau and would return separately. Kohler delivered the orders to the soldiers at 17:03 hours. They saluted and departed, leaving Kohler alone with the Kübelwagen. At 17:15 hours, as dusk settled over Berlin and Soviet artillery intensified its bombardment of the northern districts, Ernst Kohler drove the vehicle west toward Potsdam. In the passenger seat sat a middle-aged man in civilian clothes carrying a heavy rucksack. To the few sentries they passed, they were simply 2 more people fleeing the dying city. Generalleutnant Wilhelm von Richter had vanished from official records. His absence wouldn't be noticed for at least 24 hours, perhaps longer given the chaos. By then, he would be beyond the range of any search. April 22, 1945, 1945 hours, the second waypoint. The shuttered factory in Potsdam had been a textile mill before the war. Now it was a hollow shell, its machinery removed for scrap metal, its windows broken by bomb concussions. Kohler parked the Kübelwagen behind the loading dock and killed the engine. For 5 minutes, they sat in darkness, listening to artillery rumble in the distance. Potsdam, though west of Berlin, was not safe. Soviet forces would encircle the city from multiple directions. At 1950 hours, another vehicle approached, a Wehrmacht transport truck, paint faded and rust-spotted, marked with the insignia of a supply unit. It stopped beside the Kubelwagen and 3 men emerged. Von Richter recognized 2 of them. Feldwebel Klaus Richter, no relation, despite the shared surname, and Unteroffizier Hans Mayer, both from his old division. The third man was a civilian, introduced only as Herr Brandt, who said nothing and whose role was to drive. The cargo bed of the truck contained crates supposedly destined for defensive positions south of Berlin. In reality, half the crates were empty. The other half contained additional supplies, more civilian clothing, false documents, and crucially, Red Cross armbands and identification papers. The International Red Cross had maintained a presence in Germany throughout the war, evacuating wounded and facilitating prisoner exchanges. In the chaos of collapse, Red Cross credentials offered freedom of movement that military uniforms did not. Von Richter transferred his rucksack to the truck. The Kubelwagen, now a liability, was driven into the factory building and covered with tarps. If discovered, it would simply be another abandoned vehicle among thousands. At 2020 hours, the truck departed Potsdam, heading southwest on secondary roads toward Teltow. Von Richter, Kohler, and the 3 others rode in the cargo bed, hidden among the crates. Mayer had a current map showing Soviet and German positions as of April 21st, now hopelessly outdated but the best available. Their route threaded between the advancing Soviet spearheads, aiming for a temporary gap in the encirclement where German defensive lines still, theoretically, held. The journey should have taken 40 minutes. It took 3 hours. Twice, they encountered Wehrmacht checkpoints manned by increasingly desperate units. Herr Brandt, the civilian driver, presented forged transport orders that von Richter had prepared weeks earlier. The paperwork was perfect because it was genuine, typed on official forms, signed with authentic stamps that von Richter had borrowed from the logistics office. The officers manning the checkpoints, exhausted and overwhelmed, waved them through after cursory inspections. Once, they had to detour 8 kilometers north to avoid a Soviet reconnaissance unit that had pushed farther west than expected. The delay was agonizing. Every hour increased the probability that von Richter's absence would be noticed, that an alert would be issued, that the slim window of chaos would close. April 23, 1945, 1:30 hours. The farm complex near Teltow. The property belonged to a family named Gerhardt, dairy farmers who had lost 2 sons to the Eastern Front. The surviving son, Friedrich Gerhardt, age 42, had been exempted from military service due to a childhood injury that left him with a pronounced limp. Von Richter had contacted Friedrich through intermediaries in March, offering 5 kilograms of gold in exchange for shelter and silence. Friedrich, seeing the inevitable collapse, had agreed. The truck pulled into the barn at 1:45 hours. Friedrich met them with a kerosene lantern, his face shadowed and suspicious. Von Richter handed him a small cloth bag containing the promised gold, approximately $17,000 worth at 1945 prices, a fortune for a farmer. Friedrich weighed it in his hand, tested 1 bar with a knife to verify it wasn't lead, then nodded curtly and led them to the farmhouse cellar. The cellar had been modified. A false wall of stacked potato crates concealed a narrow space behind, barely large enough for 5 men to lie down. Water, tinned food, and a bucket for waste were stored inside. Friedrich explained that Soviet advance units had already passed through Teltow, moving east toward Berlin. The front line was fluid, chaotic. Within days, Teltow would be firmly in Soviet hands, and any Wehrmacht personnel found in the area would be captured or executed. Von Richter's plan accounted for this. They would remain hidden in the cellar for approximately 72 hours, until the immediate combat moved past. Then, disguised as Red Cross officials evacuating displaced persons, they would move south and west, away from the Soviet advance, toward the areas being occupied by American and British forces. The Western Allies, according to intelligence reports, were more interested in processing prisoners than executing them on site. The plan depended on timing, luck, and the chaos of total collapse masking their movements. April 23 through April 26, 1945, the waiting. They spent 3.5 days in the cellar behind the potato crates. Soviet troops occupied Telto on April 24th. From their hiding place, they could hear boots on the floorboards above, shouted commands in Russian, occasional gunfire as isolated German units were eliminated. Once, a Soviet soldier entered the cellar, searching for hidden weapons or supplies. He stood 2 meters from their hiding place, close enough that von Richter could hear him breathing. Then he left, apparently satisfied. Friedrich Gerhardt played his role perfectly, presenting himself as a simple farmer with no political affiliations. The Soviets requisitioned his livestock and most of his stored food, but otherwise left him unmolested. In the darkness of the cellar, von Richter thought about the timing. If the intelligence was accurate, Hitler would commit suicide within the next 4 days. The Reich Chancellery bunker would fall to the Soviets by May 2nd. In the chaos of documenting thousands of corpses from the bunker complex and surrounding buildings, one missing general might be assumed dead, his body lost in the rubble or consumed by fire. Or he might be listed as captured by the Soviets, a convenient fiction that would end Allied searches. Everything depended on whether anyone in Berlin's collapsing command structure cared enough about Wilhelm von Richter to issue a specific manhunt order. Von Richter gambled that they didn't. He was deputy chief of logistics, not a household name. He had no significant war crimes attached to his record. He'd spent the war organizing supply convoys, not commanding extermination units. In the final accounting, when Allied prosecutors began assembling their lists for Nuremberg, he calculated that he would be far down the priority list if he appeared at all. April 26, 1945, 2300 hours, movement resumes. Friedrich Gerhardt, risking execution if discovered, brought news from the village. Soviet forces had pushed east, following the retreating Wehrmacht into Berlin proper. Telto was now a rear area logistics hub, with transport columns moving through daily. The immediate danger had passed. Von Richter made the decision to move. Remaining in the cellar indefinitely risked discovery, starvation, or being trapped if Soviet military police began systematic searches. Better to exploit the current confusion. They emerged at 23:30 hours, muscles cramped from days of immobility. The farm was dark except for distant fires visible on the eastern horizon, Berlin burning. Von Richter distributed the Red Cross identification papers and armbands. The documents identified them as Swiss nationals working with the International Committee of the Red Cross, engaged in evacuating refugees and displaced persons. The papers were expertly forged, bearing stamps and signatures copied from genuine Red Cross documents that von Richter had studied. The truck, hidden in an equipment shed, was reloaded with their supplies. Herr Brandt, the silent driver, reappeared from wherever he had been hiding. At 23:55 hours, they departed the Gerhardt farm, headlights off, navigating by moonlight along country roads. Their route led southwest, toward the American lines. March 17, 2024, 15:30 hours, 79 years later. Dr. Elena Vasquez, chief forensic anthropologist at the University of Buenos Aires, stood in the hidden chamber beneath the villa in San Carlos de Bariloche, surrounded by the preserved artifacts of a vanished life. She had spent 3 hours photographing, measuring, and cataloging every item. Now she held the leather-bound journal, its pages filled with meticulous German script, and began to read. The first entry was dated May 11, 1945. Crossed the border at Feldkirch. The Americans asked no questions. The Red Cross papers were sufficient. We are now in Switzerland. I am no longer Wilhelm von Richter. That man died in Berlin officially if not literally. I am now Otto Pape, a displaced person from Saxony fleeing the Soviet advance. Kohler is now Martin Steiner. The others have their own names. We have agreed never to use our real identities again, even among ourselves. The past is dead. We exist only in the present. Dr. Vasquez's team worked through the night, translating the journal entries. Forensic linguist Dr. Roberto Mendez from the National University of Cordoba analyzed the handwriting, comparing it to authenticated samples of von Richter's writing held in German military archives. The comparison focused on distinctive features: the formation of capital letters, the angle of slant, the pressure patterns evident in the pen strokes, and idiosyncratic abbreviations. The analysis, completed on March 19, 2024, returned a 97.3% probability match. The journal had been written by the same hand that signed requisition forms and battle orders between 1939 and 1945. March 20, 2024, 900 hours. International cooperation begins. Dr. Vasquez contacted the Bundesarchiv Militärarchiv in Freiburg, Germany, where Wehrmacht personnel records are stored. Dr. Friedrich Mannheim, senior military historian, had spent 3 decades studying the fates of missing Wehrmacht officers. The case of Generalleutnant Wilhelm von Richter, previously closed with the conclusion, "Died Berlin, April 1945, was reopened. Dr. Mannheim accessed von Richter's complete military file, personnel records, efficiency reports, award citations, and crucially, dental charts prepared by Wehrmacht Medical Services in 1943. German military medicine, despite the chaos of total war, maintained meticulous health records. Von Richter's dental chart showed 3 gold crowns on lower molars, 2 filled cavities, and distinctive wear patterns on incisors consistent with a former pipe smoker. The dentures found in the Bariloche chamber were photographed and examined by forensic odontologist Dr. Carmen Ruiz at the Argentine Institute of Forensic Sciences. Her report, issued March 25, 2024, confirmed a positive match. The dentures had been crafted to replace teeth matching the exact pattern documented in von Richter's 1943 dental chart. The gold crowns were still present. The construction technique and materials were consistent with European dental work from the 1940s 1950s. The probability that these dentures belonged to anyone other than Wilhelm von Richter was calculated at less than 0.2%. March 28, 2024, the documents reveal their secrets. 3 passports, issued by different countries at different times, all bearing photographs of the same man aging across decades. The first, a Swiss displaced persons travel document dated August 1945, identified the holder as Otto Pape, born Chemnitz, Germany, 1897. The photograph showed a gaunt middle-aged man with thinning hair and haunted eyes, recognizably the same face as the Wehrmacht identification photo, but aged by trauma and exhaustion. The second passport, issued by the Argentine Republic in 1951, identified Ricardo Clement, naturalized citizen, occupation listed as translator. The photograph showed the same man, now heavier, hair now white, wearing wire-rimmed glasses that hadn't appeared in earlier photos. The document contained entry stamps from Uruguay, Paraguay, and Brazil between 1951 and 1968. The third passport, also Argentine, dated 1969, belonged to Friedrich Wenner, retired businessman. This photograph showed an elderly man, bald, deeply lined, but with the same distinctive bone structure. The prominent cheekbones, the set of the ears, the shape of the jaw. Forensic facial recognition specialist Dr. Ana Torres at the University of La Plata used advanced morphometric analysis to compare the 3 passport photographs with the authenticated Wehrmacht photo. The analysis measured 47 distinct facial landmarks: interpupillary distance, nose width, ear positioning, chin prominence, and subtle structural features that remain consistent despite aging. The conclusion, delivered April 2, 2024, All four photographs depicted the same individual, accounting for normal aging processes across a span of approximately 35 years. Probability of error, less than 0.5%. April 5, 2024, the letters to Marguerite. 3 letters never sent, written between 1953 and 1959. They were the most damning evidence, not of identity, but of consciousness of guilt. Von Richter knew he was a fugitive. He knew his wife believed him dead, and he deliberately maintained that fiction while pouring out his grief and loneliness onto pages she would never read. The first letter, dated June 3, 1953, their 20th wedding anniversary. Mein liebste Marguerite, I know you cannot read these words. I know you believe I died with the Reich, buried in the rubble of Berlin. Perhaps that would have been better. Perhaps I should have stayed, faced whatever judgment awaited, rather than choosing this half-life of exile and assumed names. But I was a coward, Liebst. When they told me you and the children were gone, something broke inside. I could not face more death. I could not surrender to be imprisoned or executed for a war I came to hate. So I ran, and here I remain in this beautiful prison of mountains and lakes, living under a borrowed name, remembering everything I lost. The letter continued for 4 pages, recounting details of their life together, their first meeting at the Munich ball, their honeymoon in the Bavarian Alps, the birth of Helene, Marguerite's habit of humming Schubert songs while cooking. These details, cross-referenced with Marguerite's diary held in the Berlin State Library archives, matched perfectly. Only Wilhelm von Richter could have written them. The second letter, dated December 8, 1956, Maximilian's 20th birthday, had he lived. Max would have been a man today, 20 years old. I wonder what he would have become. He had your intelligence, Marguerite, your gentle curiosity about the world. He would not have become a soldier. Thank God he was spared that fate, though the manner of his sparing haunts me still. I dream of the house in Dahlem, of the bomb falling, of seconds that could have changed everything. If the air raid warning had sounded 1 minute earlier, if you had taken the children to the public shelter instead, if the bomber's aim had been 1 degree different, the mathematics of grief is infinite. The third letter, dated November 11, 1959, 27 years after they met. I am an old man now, Marguerite. 62 years, though I feel 90. The people here know me as Ricardo Clement, a translator who worked for various German businesses after the war. They think I lost my family to Allied bombing in Hamburg. I do not correct them. Let them believe the fiction. The truth is buried in Berlin, in an unmarked mass grave, along with you and the children and 6 million others whose deaths I witnessed from the logistics office, where I calculated how many tons of supplies were needed to continue the killing. I was not a monster, Liebst. I gave no orders for atrocities, but I facilitated the machine that committed them. Does it matter that I grew to despise what I served, if I served it efficiently until the end? These are questions I can never answer, and you can never absolve me. Dr. Vasquez read these letters in the laboratory, handling the brittle paper with gloved hands, and felt the weight of history pressing down. This was not an academic exercise. These were confessions from a ghost, a man who had stolen decades of life he had no right to, living in comfort while his victims and their families received no justice. April 10, 2024, the financial trail. Argentine Federal Police investigator Captain Javier Morales obtained court orders to access historical banking records. The trail led to 3 banks in Buenos Aires and Bariloche: Banco de la Nación Argentina, Banco de la Provincia de Rio Negro, and a now-defunct private bank called Banco Germano-Argentina that had catered to German immigrants. Account records for Ricardo Clement showed the initial deposit on March 23, 1951, $180,000 converted to Argentine pesos at the official exchange rate. This was an enormous sum, equivalent to approximately $3.2 million in 2024, adjusted for inflation. The source of funds was listed as immigration assistance, private European donors. Over the next 28 years, the account showed regular withdrawals for living expenses, but also income. Salary deposits from several German-language newspapers and publishing houses in Buenos Aires, payment for translation services, and in 1968, a large deposit of $47,000 from the sale of property in Bariloche. The property sale led investigators to land registry records. On August 12, 1968, Ricardo Clement sold a 15-hectare plot of land overlooking Lago Gutierrez, 20 kilometers from Bariloche, to a development company. He had purchased the land in 1954 for $8,000. He sold it in 1968 for $47,000, a six-fold return reflecting Bariloche's growth as a tourist destination. The villa where the hidden chamber was discovered had been purchased in 1952 under the name Ricardo Clement for $12,000. Property records showed continuous residence until 1979. The last utility payment for the property was dated October 1979. After that, the house stood empty until it was sold at auction in 1982 to settle the estate of Ricardo Clement, deceased intestate. No death certificate existed for Ricardo Clement. The probate court records from 1980-119-82 indicated that neighbors reported the house abandoned. Legal notices went unanswered, and the court eventually declared the owner presumed deceased after 7 years of absence. Investigators cross-referenced this timeline with the Friedrich Wenner passport, issued 1969. The implication: Von Richter had assumed yet another identity around 1969-1970, possibly moving to a different location, while maintaining the Bariloche villa as a safe house or storage facility. But where had he gone, and when had he actually died? April 18, 2024, the journal's final entries. The leather-bound journal contained entries spanning from May 1945 to June 1977. The handwriting in later entries was shakier, the entries shorter and less frequent. The final entry, dated June 14, 1977, read, 80 years old today. I have outlived Hitler by 32 years, outlived the Reich by 32 years, outlived any reasonable expectation of justice by 3 decades. The young man who charged French machine guns at Verdun is dead. The officer who organized supply lines for a criminal regime is dead. Even the refugee who fled to Argentina in fear is dead. What remains is an old man with too many names and too many memories. I wonder if Marguerite would have forgiven me. I wonder if I deserve forgiveness. I do not believe in God. 4 years in the trenches of the Western Front killed that faith. But if I am wrong, if there is a judgment awaiting, I will tell them this. I was a coward. I chose survival over accountability. I do not ask for mercy. I ask only that my story, if it is ever discovered, be told complete. I was neither hero nor monster. I was a man who lost everything, who made terrible choices in service of a terrible cause, and who fled rather than faced what he deserved. Let that be my epitaph. The journal ended there. No further entries, no indication of what happened next. April 25, 2024, the search for the grave. Dr. Vasquez coordinated with Argentine authorities to search cemetery records throughout Patagonia. The search parameters: European male, deceased approximately 1977-1982, possibly buried under the names Friedrich Wenner, Otto Pape, or Ricardo Clement. The search took 2 weeks and involved 13 cemeteries across Rio Negro and Neuquén provinces. On May 8, 2024, investigators found the grave. Cementerio Municipal de Bariloche, Section D, Row 14, Grave 47. The marker was simple granite inscribed, Friedrich Wenner, 1897-1979, Descansa en Paz. An exhumation order was obtained on May 15th. On May 20th, forensic teams excavated the grave. The coffin, simple pine with brass handles, contained skeletal remains in good condition due to the cool, dry soil. Preliminary analysis indicated a European male, age at death between 78 to 85 years, height approximately 178 centimeters. The teeth matched the dental chart and dentures perfectly. DNA samples were extracted from the femur and compared against genetic material from surviving relatives. Marguerite von Richter had 2 sisters, both deceased, but 4 nieces and nephews. Von Richter's relatives by marriage were located in Germany. 3 agreed to provide DNA samples. The mitochondrial DNA analysis, completed June 10, 2024, confirmed familial relationship with 99.7% probability. Nuclear DNA analysis, compared against genetic information from Helene von Richter's medical records preserved in a Berlin hospital archive, confirmed a parental match. The skeleton in grave 47 was definitively Wilhelm Eduard von Richter. He had died in Bariloche, Argentina, sometime in 1979, 34 years after he was officially declared dead in Berlin. He was buried under a false name, mourned by no one, his true identity unknown to the priest who conducted the funeral and the cemetery workers who filled in the grave. The journal entries, combined with interrogation of now elderly contacts and cross-referencing with declassified Allied intelligence documents, allowed investigators to reconstruct von Richter's complete escape route and the network that facilitated it. April 26 through May 8, 1945, the journey to Switzerland. Von Richter and his 4 companions, Kohler, Mayer, Richter, and Brandt, traveled 850 kilometers from Teltow to the Swiss border over 12 days. The journey, documented in the journal with meticulous detail, exploited the chaos of Germany's collapse and the gaps between Allied occupation zones. From Teltow, they moved southwest toward Leipzig, avoiding major roads. The Red Cross credentials proved invaluable. American military police at checkpoints, confronted with Swiss Red Cross officials claiming to evacuate displaced persons, waved them through with minimal inspection. The Americans were overwhelmed with millions of refugees, demobilized German soldiers, and liberated prisoners from concentration camps. 5 more people with plausible papers were not worth bureaucratic effort. On April 30th, the day Hitler committed suicide, though they wouldn't learn this for 3 more days, they reached the temporary camp at Hof, near the Czechoslovak border. Here, legitimate Red Cross officials were processing refugees. Von Richter's group blended into the chaos, sleeping in tents, receiving food rations, behaving exactly like the displaced persons they pretended to be. On May 2nd, they joined a Red Cross convoy of trucks transporting refugees toward American-controlled zones in Bavaria. The convoy, genuinely organized by the International Committee of the Red Cross, provided perfect cover. Von Richter sat in the back of a truck with 70 genuine refugees, families who had fled the Soviet advance, concentration camp survivors, former forced laborers from a dozen countries, and shared their fear, exhaustion, and hope. By May 7th, when Germany signed the unconditional surrender, they were in Munich, housed in a displaced persons camp in the Schwabing district. The camp held 2,300 people of 19 different nationalities. Allied authorities, struggling to sort out who everyone was, focused on identifying SS personnel and major Nazi Party officials. A middle-aged man with Swiss Red Cross credentials claiming to be a charity worker from Saxony attracted no suspicion. On May 11th, von Richter, Kohler, and Mayer, Brandt and Richter having departed separately for their own destinations, boarded a train to Feldkirch, Austria, at the Swiss border. Their documents identified them as Swiss nationals returning home after providing relief services in Germany. Austrian border guards, now under Allied authority, barely glanced at their papers. At 15:20 hours on May 11, 1945, they crossed into Switzerland at the Feldkirch-Buch border crossing. They were free. May 11th through August 30th, 1945, Switzerland, the safe house. Switzerland, neutral throughout the war, became the critical way station. Von Richter used his remaining gold to rent a small apartment in Zurich under the name Otto Pape. He, Kohler, and Mayer lived quietly, learning Swiss-German dialect, practicing their cover stories, waiting for the immediate post-war confusion to settle into routine. During these months, von Richter made contact with the nascent escape network that would later be called the Ratline, though that term wouldn't be coined until the 1960s. The network consisted of several interconnected groups, sympathetic Catholic clergy who believed in offering Christian mercy even to former enemies, German and Austrian expatriates in Switzerland who assisted for ideological or financial reasons, and opportunistic smugglers who cared only about payment. Von Richter's contact was a priest named Father Anton Weber, a German-born Franciscan who operated a refugee assistance office in Bern. Father Weber, documented in declassified U.S. intelligence files from the 1990s, provided false baptismal certificates and identity documents to numerous former German officers between 1945 and 1948. He believed he was saving souls, offering these men a chance at redemption through new lives in Catholic countries like Argentina, where they could contribute to society rather than face execution or imprisonment. Whether Father Weber knew the full extent of his client's crimes remains debated. Von Richter's journal suggests he presented himself as a logistics officer with no involvement in atrocities, technically true, if morally insufficient. Through Father Weber's network, von Richter obtained genuine documents, a baptismal certificate from a destroyed church in Saxony, the original records lost to Allied bombing, making verification impossible, a Swiss residency permit, and letters of recommendation from fictional employers. August 30th, 1945, the decision point. Von Richter recorded the decision. Kohler has decided to remain in Europe. He will move to Spain under the name Martin Steiner, perhaps eventually return to Germany when sufficient time has passed. Mayer has family in Austria and will attempt to rejoin them under a false name. I have no one. Marguerite and the children are dead. My parents are dead. I have no siblings. I am untethered to Europe. Better to move as far as possible, to a place where German refugees are common enough that one more attracts no attention, but remote enough that Allied investigators are unlikely to search thoroughly. Father Weber suggests Argentina. There is a large German community in Buenos Aires, and the government is sympathetic to European immigration. I will go. September through November 1945, the Vatican connection. Declassified documents from the U.S. State Department, released in 1998, revealed that certain officials within the Vatican, particularly in the Pontifical Commission of Assistance, facilitated the emigration of refugees, including war criminals, to South America. The motivation was complex. Genuine humanitarian concern mixed with anti-communist ideology. Many in the Catholic Church saw former German officers as potential allies against Soviet expansion, and institutional reluctance to cooperate fully with Allied authorities. Von Richter traveled from Switzerland to Genoa, Italy, via the network. Father Weber provided introduction letters to contacts in Milan and Genoa. In Genoa, von Richter received a Red Cross passport, a genuine document issued by the International Committee of the Red Cross for Stateless Refugees, in the name Otto Pape. The passport, based on the false documents accumulated in Switzerland, was entirely legal by the standards of post-war chaos. He also received passage on a ship, the SS Giovanna C., an Italian freighter converted to passenger service, scheduled to depart Genoa for Buenos Aires on January 15, 1946. The cost of passage was 12 kilograms of gold, approximately $4,300 at 1946 prices, an enormous sum, but von Richter had the resources. The gold, originally stolen from Reichsbank reserves, purchased his ticket to freedom. January 15 through February 28, 1946, the Atlantic crossing. The SS Giovanna C carried 847 passengers, mostly displaced persons fleeing the ruins of Europe. Von Richter shared a cabin with 3 other men, a Polish former laborer, a Hungarian Jew who had survived Auschwitz, and a German engineer who may or may not have been traveling under his real name. The ship's manifest, preserved in Argentine immigration records, lists Otto Pape, born Chemnitz 1897, occupation listed as translator and administrator. The voyage took 43 days, calling at ports in Spain and Brazil before reaching Buenos Aires. Von Richter spent the time practicing Spanish, studying Argentine culture, and refining his cover story. According to the journal, he became friendly with a genuine Red Cross official on the ship, learning details about the organization's operations that would make his impersonation more convincing. March 1, 1946, Buenos Aires. The SS Giovanna C docked at the port of Buenos Aires at 7:30 hours. Argentine immigration officials processed passengers throughout the day. Von Richter, presenting his Red Cross passport and letters of introduction from Father Weber's contacts, was admitted without difficulty. Argentina's government, under President Juan Perón, actively encouraged European immigration, particularly skilled workers and professionals. Otto Pape entered Argentina legally, with valid documents, and disappeared into the German community of Buenos Aires. March 1946 through March 1951, building a new life. Von Richter spent 5 years in Buenos Aires, working as a translator for German-language newspapers and businesses. He lived modestly, avoiding attention, cultivating a reputation as a quiet, competent professional who had lost his family to the war. This was his partial truth. The family loss was real. The narrative around it was false. In 1948, he obtained Argentine citizenship under the name Ricardo Clement through naturalization, presenting the same documents that had gained him entry. The Argentine government conducted no background investigation. Ricardo Clement became a legal citizen. During these years, Von Richter established the financial foundation for his retirement. The remaining gold was sold gradually through discreet contacts in Buenos Aires' jewelry district. US dollars and Swiss francs, exchanged at favorable rates, were deposited in multiple bank accounts. He invested in real estate as Argentina's economy boomed in the late 1940s. He also made contact with other German émigrés. Some were innocent refugees, others were not. Von Richter's journal mentions meetings with former colleagues but provides no names. Declassified U.S. intelligence documents suggest Buenos Aires harbored hundreds of former Nazi officials and officers in the late 1940s, protected by a combination of Argentine government policy, inadequate Allied resources for investigation, and the sheer number of German immigrants among whom they could hide. March 1951, the move to Bariloche. Buenos Aires, though safe, was also home to growing Allied intelligence presence. The Israeli Mossad, established in 1949, began hunting Nazi fugitives. American and British intelligence agencies maintained officers in Buenos Aires monitoring immigrant communities. Von Richter, though not a high-priority target, recognized that remaining in the capital increased risk. He purchased the villa in Bariloche in March 1951. The town, 1,640 kilometers southwest of Buenos Aires in the Andean foothills, offered remoteness, a substantial German community to blend into, and spectacular isolation. The villa, overlooking Nahul Huepi Lake, became his permanent residence. Here, as Ricardo Clement, retired translator, he lived for 28 years. He participated in the local German Cultural Society, attended Catholic Mass, a convenience, not a conversion. His journal confirms his atheism, and maintained cordial but distant relationships with neighbors. He was known as a polite, solitary old man who had lost his family in the war and preferred quiet contemplation to socializing. He also built the Hidden Chamber, The journal entry from October 1952 describes the project: hiring a local contractor to add storage space to the basement, then personally constructing the false wall and installing the reinforced door while the contractor was away. The chamber was his insurance policy, a place to hide evidence of his true identity, resources for emergency escape if needed, and perhaps a confessional for a man with no one to confess to. The chamber remained sealed from 1952 until March 2024, its secrets preserved in mountain air for 72 years. The journal entries become sparse after 1970. Von Richter was 73 years old, slowing physically, increasingly isolated. But the Friedrich Wenner passport, issued in 1969, suggests he maintained the capacity for movement and the paranoia that demanded alternate identities. Where did Friedrich Wenner travel? The passport contains entry stamps from Paraguay 1971, Uruguay 1973, and Brazil 1975. Short trips, each lasting no more than 2 weeks according to exit stamps. The purpose is not documented in the journal. One possibility: Von Richter was maintaining contact with other fugitives in the network. Paraguay, under the dictatorship of Alfredo Stroessner, was notoriously friendly to Nazi fugitives. Joseph Mengele, the Auschwitz doctor, lived in Paraguay from 1958 to 1979. Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, resided in Bolivia. These men formed a loose community of exiles, occasionally meeting, trading information about Allied investigations, supporting each other financially. Did Von Richter know Mengele? Did they meet in the remote towns of the Paraguayan Chaco or the Brazilian jungle? The evidence is suggestive but not conclusive. A bank deposit in Von Richter's account in April 1971, shortly after returning from Paraguay, totaled $8,000 with no documented source. Payment for services rendered, a loan between fugitives, simple investment returns. The truth died with him. Another possibility: Von Richter was preparing an additional escape route. A man who had successfully vanished once might reasonably prepare contingency plans. The trips to Paraguay and Brazil might have established safe houses, buried resources, or cultivated contacts for a scenario where even Bariloche became unsafe. That scenario never materialized. By 1976, Von Richter was 79 years old and in declining health. The journal entry from January 1977 mentions persistent cough and difficulty walking long distances. He was aging out of the capacity for further flight. The final journal entry, June 14, 1977, on his 80th birthday, carries the weight of a man settling accounts with his own conscience. The entry quoted earlier, the reflection on cowardice, survival, and accountability, reads like a man who knows his time is limited. After June 1977, the documentary record goes silent. The villa's utility records show continued occupancy through October 1979. Then nothing. No death certificate was filed. No obituary appeared in Bariloche's German-language newspaper. Ricardo Clement simply stopped existing in the documentary record. The grave marker says Friedrich Wenner died in 1979. No month or day is given, suggesting the exact date was unknown or invented by whoever arranged the burial. Cemetery records indicate the plot was purchased in November 1979, and the burial occurred shortly thereafter. The buyer was listed as family representative, a designation that requires no proof and suggests someone handling affairs for a deceased person with no legal heirs. Investigators suspect the family representative was another member of the fugitive network, someone tasked with quietly disposing of Von Richter's body and closing out his affairs. The villa was abandoned, the hidden chamber sealed, and the evidence left to accumulate dust for 45 years. One tantalizing clue emerged during the investigation: a safety deposit box at Banco de la Nación Argentina in Bariloche, rented in 1962 under the name Ricardo Clement. The box, unpaid since 1979, was flagged during the investigation. A court order opened it in July 2024. Inside, $8,000 in cash, 2 gold bars totaling 2 kilograms, a Luger P08 pistol manufactured in 1917, possibly von Richter's service weapon from World War I, and a sealed envelope addressed to whoever finds this. The envelope contained a single page, typed in German, unsigned but almost certainly written by von Richter. It read, "If you are reading this, I am dead and somehow the truth has emerged. I expect no sympathy. I do not claim innocence. I served a regime that committed monstrous crimes, and though I personally gave no orders for murder, I facilitated the machinery that perpetrated it. I knew what was happening. By 1943, everyone knew. I continued to serve because I was a soldier, because I valued duty over morality, and because I was a coward who feared the consequences of resistance more than I feared the consequences of complicity. When the war ended, I faced a choice: surrender and likely execution, or flee and live. I chose life. I do not justify this choice. I simply made it. I have lived 34 years beyond the death of the Reich, in exile under false names, with no family and no peace. I have not suffered as my victims suffered. I have not faced the justice I deserved. If there is an afterlife, which I doubt, I will answer to a higher authority than the Nuremberg Tribunal. If there is not, then I have simply delayed the inevitable extinction we all face. Do not make a hero of me. I was not a hero. Do not make a monster of me. I was not unique in my crimes. Thousands of others committed worse. I was simply a man of my time, shaped by war, undone by war, who fled the consequences and lived with the guilt. Let history judge whether I deserved the years I stole." The document was dated August 1978, approximately 1 year before his death. It was his final statement, typed and sealed against the possibility that his true identity might one day be discovered. And in March 2024, 79 years after he vanished from Berlin, it was. The discovery of Wilhelm von Richter's Refuge in Barilach reopened fundamental questions about accountability, justice, and the limitations of both. Dr. Mannheim, the German military historian, published an analysis in June 2024 examining von Richter's record. The conclusion was uncomfortable. By the standards applied at Nuremberg, von Richter was not a major war criminal. He commanded no extermination units. He participated in no massacres. His division in Normandy committed no documented atrocities. As a logistics officer, his role was technical, not ideological. Had he surrendered in 1945, he likely would have been interned, interrogated, and released within 2 to 3 years, like tens of thousands of other Wehrmacht officers deemed not to warrant prosecution. But this legal assessment misses the moral complexity. Von Richter enabled the machine. He calculated the tonnage of ammunition required to continue offensives on the Eastern Front, where Wehrmacht forces implemented systematic murder alongside military operations. He organized supply convoys that fed armies occupying nations where millions were worked to death, starved, or executed. He knew what was happening. His journal confirms this, and he continued serving efficiently until the end. Intent matters in law. Complicity matters in morality. Von Richter lived in the space between, not innocent enough to deserve exoneration, not guilty enough to rank with the Nuremberg defendants, but complicit enough that his escape denied justice to those who deserved to see every facilitator of Nazi crimes held accountable. His escape was also not unique. Research by historians including Gerald Steinescher and Uki Goni documented that hundreds, possibly thousands, of German and Austrian officials escaped to South America via networks similar to the one von Richter used. The Vatican's role remains controversial. Some officials provided assistance from genuine humanitarian motives. Others were ideologically sympathetic to fascism or motivated by anti-communism. The Rattling Network, as it became known, facilitated escapes for men whose guilt ranged from administrative complicity to direct participation in genocide. Adolf Eichmann, architect of the Holocaust logistics, escaped to Argentina via similar channels. Joseph Mengele, who conducted lethal experiments on concentration camp prisoners, lived in South America until drowning in Brazil in 1979, the same year von Richter died. Klaus Barbie, who tortured and murdered resistance fighters in France, lived in Bolivia until his extradition in 1983. These men stole decades of life while their victims received no justice. Families of those murdered never saw the perpetrators held accountable. Survivors of camps and massacres lived with the knowledge that the men who had destroyed their lives were living comfortably in exile, unpunished. Von Richter's refuge in Bariloche, his comfortable existence under an assumed name, his ability to die peacefully at age 82, all of this represents a moral failure. Not his moral failure alone. He was only one man. But the failure of post-war justice systems overwhelmed by the scale of Nazi crimes, of Allied governments that prioritized Cold War concerns over complete accountability, of nations like Argentina that valued immigration over investigation. At the same time, von Richter's journal reveals a man fully aware of his moral position. He did not claim innocence. He did not justify his actions. He understood that he was a coward who chose survival over accountability, and he lived with that knowledge for 34 years. His unsent letters to Marguerite, his final statement, his journal entries, all confirm a man who never achieved peace with his choices. Is this suffering sufficient? Of course not. The victims of the regime he served suffered infinitely more, but it complicates the narrative. Von Richter was neither a cartoonish villain celebrating escape nor a wrongly accused innocent. He was a man who made choices, understood their weight, and lived with consequences far lighter than justice demanded but heavier than simple impunity. The discovery of his refuge forces a reckoning with how many others remain undiscovered. The generation that fought World War II is almost entirely gone. The last living perpetrators are now over 95 years old. Time has accomplished what justice systems could not, the final accountability of death. But secrets remain. How many hidden chambers exist in Argentine villas, Brazilian farmhouses, Paraguayan estates? How many men died peacefully under false names, their crimes unacknowledged, their escapes unsuspected? Von Richter was discovered by accident. A construction project, a sledgehammer through a wall. How many others will never be found because no one tears down the right wall? The Bariloche villa now sits in legal limbo. The Argentine government has declared it a historical site pending decision on its future. Some advocate for a museum documenting the escape networks and the failure of justice. Others argue it should be demolished, denying von Richter even the dubious immortality of being remembered. Dr. Vasquez, who led the forensic investigation, reflected in an interview published in July 2024, "We cannot undo the past. We cannot retroactively deliver justice to Wilhelm von Richter. He lived the life he stole and died without facing consequences. But we can ensure that his story is told completely, not as a tale of clever escape, but as documentation of how impunity functions when systems fail. We owe that to the victims." March 17, 2025, exactly 1 year after the discovery. The villa in Bariloche has been converted into a small museum, El Museo de la Memoria y la Impunidad, the Museum of Memory and Impunity. The hidden chamber has been preserved exactly as it was found. Visitors can see the desk, the journal behind protective glass, the uniforms, the passports. Photographs and documents tell the story of Wilhelm von Richter's life, crimes, and escape. But the museum's purpose is not celebration. Text panels throughout explain the context. The estimated 9,000 German, Austrian, and Croatian war criminals who escaped to South America, the networks that facilitated their flights, the failures of Allied justice, the complicity of governments and institutions that valued other priorities above accountability. A wall displays photographs of victims, Jewish families murdered in occupied territories, Soviet prisoners who died in Wehrmacht camps, civilians killed in reprisal actions, forced laborers worked to death supporting the German war machine. These are the people Wilhelm von Richter's logistics enabled. These are the ones who received no justice while he lived comfortably on a lake in Patagonia. The final room of the museum contains von Richter's unsigned statement, enlarged and displayed in German and Spanish. I do not claim innocence. I facilitated the machinery that perpetrated monstrous crimes. I chose life over accountability. Let history judge whether I deserved the years I stole. History's judgment is clear. He did not deserve them, but he took them anyway, and the world failed to stop him. Outside, the lake reflects the mountains in perfect stillness. Tourists walk the waterfront, eating ice cream, taking photographs. Life continues. The past becomes history, then artifact, then museum exhibit. The men who shaped that history die and decompose, and eventually only their remnants remain. Bones in graves, documents in archives, secrets in hidden chambers. Wilhelm Eduard von Richter was born in 1897 into an empire that no longer exists. He died in 1979 in a country that didn't know his real name. Between those points, he lived 92 years, participated in 2 world wars, served a genocidal regime, fled justice, and existed for 3 decades as a ghost with a comfortable retirement. The earth kept his secret for 79 years. The mountains of Patagonia, indifferent to human morality, sheltered a man who deserved no shelter. The construction workers who broke through that wall in March 2024 opened not just a hidden chamber, but a wound in the narrative of post-war justice. A reminder that many perpetrators escaped, that many crimes went unpunished, and that the past is never as settled as we believe. How many other chambers remain sealed? How many other secrets rest in mountain villas, jungle compounds, remote estates where old men died under borrowed names? How many of the guilty lived full lives while their victims were denied justice? We will never know the complete answer, but we know this. Sometimes the earth keeps secrets for 79 years, and when those secrets finally emerge, they force us to confront an uncomfortable truth, that justice delayed is not merely justice denied, but justice rendered impossible by the simple passage of time and the final escape that no one can avoid, death itself. The question is not whether Wilhelm von Richter deserved the 34 years he stole after his supposed death in Berlin. The question is how many others stole similar years, and whether our failure to find them before they died represents a failure of justice or simply an acknowledgement of its limitations. The answer, like the chamber in Bariloche, remains hidden behind walls we have not yet torn down.